Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue, joined by my site colleagues Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan for our latest Monday conversation here on the show. We've got a lot to discuss coming off Penn State's first loss. I can confirm the sun is shining here in Happy Valley. A beautiful morning here on a Monday and a little overcast now. You look at Brennan's background if you're watching on YouTube. Beaver Stadium, we can also confirm, still standing, still functioning. We were there on Monday for our weekly press conference. A little bit of a different tone this time around, a little bit of a different line of questioning this time around as well. That comes with the territory of picking up a loss, especially in the dramatic way it happened against an opponent that had happened to. Oregon Ducks coming to town, 27-24 victory in double overtime for Oregon. It was a game that, as we addressed a lot in the postgame podcast, was really getting away for Penn State late, down 17-3. That's when the Fire Franklin chants erupted from the student section. And at the end of the day, Penn State ends up holding a lead in overtime. If you missed it, 50-plus minutes on our postgame podcast. That was recorded in the wee hours of the morning. Daniel Gallen and I set up shop at the top of Beaver Stadium and had a lot to say about that game before we took our computers and our brains back home and got a little bit of rest. But we're regrouping here coming out of James Franklin press conference, and you haven't heard from our guy Mark Brennan, who's covered far more Penn State games than Daniel and I have combined in our careers. Mark, what do you want to address here and start with based on what you witnessed transpire Saturday night in Beaver Stadium?
Yeah, I won't go crazy because I know people have probably maybe heard almost enough about rehashing this whole thing, but just a couple of quick things. I went into this game, and I forget if I said it on the pod or not, but I know I wrote it, that I think we're to the point with Drew Aller, when you're in these big games, you don't really need him to win the game. What you need him to do is to not lose it. And I don't mean that as a backhanded compliment. I mean, I look at a guy like Jalen Hurts for the Eagles, and he doesn't put up the greatest stats, but recently, knock on wood, because I'm an Eagles fan, he is not making the key mistakes at the key times, and that's why they're winning games. And with Drew, when you get into these big games, I mean, Oregon last year, Ohio State last year, Notre Dame last year, key mistakes are costing the team. And it happened again against Oregon this year. I mean, he tries to make a throw that just wasn't there. And that's what I mean. He's trying to win the game there, which everybody's always trying to win the game. But, okay, fire that ball away and live to fight another day. You have 3 more downs. You're going second in overtime. He's a veteran quarterback. He can't make that kind of mistake. More broadly speaking, I think this Penn State team has a defense and special teams that are capable of competing for a national title. We thought going into the season that the offense would be there too, but it hasn't been. All the issues that we saw through the first 3 weeks, and we weren't sure, is Andy Kotelnicki hiding things? Is he not showing his entire hand? Or are these serious red flags? And they ended up being serious red flags. The lack of explosive plays, third down struggles, the running game not getting going, and the offensive line not being nearly as good as anybody, led by me. I thought this was going to be a great offensive line. Just hasn't been what we all expected. And then finally, I know some people were critical of the defense. I think that's crazy. I mean, if you would have told anybody going into this game that defense was going to hold Oregon to 17 points in regulation, I think every single Penn State fan in the universe would have taken that, and every Penn State fan, most of them would have thought Penn State would have won the game. So first downs, yardage, whatever you want to say, at the end of the day, it's about keeping them off the scoreboard, and Knowles' group did that. So the other part of it is when they kind of fall apart a little bit, run out of gas, as James Franklin said, in overtime, so much of that was because the offense failed to hold up its end of the bargain during regulation, and the defense was on the field that long. Could they have forced more 3 and out? Sure. But I just think, I look at 17 points in regulation. I don't think there's another team on this schedule that is going to hold Oregon on Oregon's schedule that's going to hold them to anything remotely close to that. Holding Oregon to 3 points in the first half, I just don't know how you could be overly critical of that defense whatsoever. I think that's playing at a championship level, and the special teams are doing the same. Not perfect, but you don't have to be perfect to win a national championship. You need to be steady. You need to be really good at what you do. And the offense has just been really, I think, not what any of us expected with all the key parts they had coming back.
Going back to your point on the defense, Oregon entered the matchup through 4 games, averaging about 51 points per game through 41 minutes in Beaver Stadium on Saturday night. They had 3 points. They had not found the end zone. Obviously, they end up with a couple touchdowns there to put Penn State in the hole later. James Franklin referenced it in postgame. He referenced it again today. They were pretty taxed as a result of the offense's inability to string together possessions and a few 3-and-outs along the way. There were also some bend but don't break drives for Oregon where they were able to maintain possession for a while. But yeah, we're not going to do much digging into the defense on this show. Full transparency. We got a lot to talk about the offense. But first, a little bit big picture. Where's the shakeup nationally coming out of this matchup? Penn State goes from number 3 to number 7 in the AP poll. They were situated at number 6 in the coaches poll. Meanwhile, you're now looking up at number 1 Ohio State, number 2 Oregon. And oh, by the way, don't overlook that game that comes 1 week after the trip to Columbus, November 8th here in Beaver Stadium. Indiana's ranked 8th in the nation right now, folks. So that's also coming down the pike. Daniel, before we talk about the offense and Drew Aller and the running game and the offensive line, Andy Kotelnicki and all the other fun stuff we got to get to after that performance, big picture, James Franklin was asked by our colleague John Sauber how he's kind of internalized and worked through things in the last 36 hours. He wasn't all that emotional in the post-game press conference. We've seen him be a lot more emotional after some losses, but he acknowledged the frustration from the fans. He talked about that again. He used the phrase, "I get it," a bunch today. But he also did a little bit of a reflection and a discussion on what these losses mean for him, what they mean for the program, and particularly this 2025 version, losing to Oregon at home. And he really said it's important for him and for this team not to allow that to define them. What did you find most interesting from Franklin's commentary on this subject?
I think that one of the things that you heard from Franklin through that answer, which is pretty long, it's up on the Lions Pride board on Lions 24/7, and I posted on social media, is that you can tell that he's felt things out about the best way to respond from things. He talked about looking at examples of how other coaches around the country handle different things. He said that certain things that certain coaches do at certain places probably wouldn't play at Penn State. So he handles things the way that he thinks they should be handled, and that reflect best on the team, university, himself, even if he might necessarily feel a little bit differently than what he is showing. I watched Brennan Cam last night, and you compare him coming off the field to what he looked like after some other games. You think about Michigan in 2023. You think about the Ohio State game last year. I actually watched the Ohio State Brennan Cam directly after the Oregon Brennan Cam, just to compare and contrast a little bit. And I think that you saw someone who, very stoic out there, can only imagine what the internal monologue that's going on there is. But I think that that's someone who, decided how he wanted to, what he wanted to project, how he wanted to go about things, and then did it that way. I think that, and that's kind of what I think he communicated throughout that answer. Another thing that he brought up in that answer, and that was a little bit of a fallback, to a couple different questions during his presser today, was that, it's one loss. Things are a little bit different now. This isn't going to define their season. He doesn't want it to define the program, all that stuff. There's still a long way to go. And he feels that the best way to handle that right now is to be positive and to project a little bit of positivity moving forward. So it was an interesting answer, interesting question. I mean, I think that Franklin has been introspective at times this year when he's gotten some of these more open-ended questions. And I think today was some pretty good insight.
Yeah, if I could add one thing, as somebody who stared down the barrel of Joe Paterno screaming at me at a press conference, I can tell you what does and doesn't play at Penn State, and nobody minded when Joe did that. No fans minded when he was getting all over me. So, James, if you ever want to yell at somebody, feel free to yell at me. The fans will actually like you because of it.
Daniel transcribed the full comment from not just the comment, the full answer from James Franklin, which has a lot to it, over at lions247.com. Our VIP subscribers can hop in for all the updates this week from Franklin. We'll get him again after practice on Wednesday. We'll have a lot of players. We'll have some assistant coaches along the way as well. But just the way he let it off, I think it's worth noting here. Quote, "We have lost to really good teams. We've lost to really, really good teams." I take that very hard, and I take that very personal because I know how important it is to so many different people. I always start with myself and the things that I can control. That's why I take it so personal. I've seen some people, and I just assume they're not actually reading the links to the stories I put up, but they've been responding to some of the stuff I put. I had a story up on early Sunday morning about the players' reaction to hearing "Fire Franklin" chants in Beaver Stadium on a night like that. And they were pretty defensive of their coach. They understood the emotions and the opinions of the fans, and they didn't say that the fans shouldn't be voicing their opinions, but they also said they had a right to tune out those kind of opinions and to rally around their coach a bit. And I think that's the one thing I want to get your take on, Mark, that you didn't really get to address in the first. The kind of the toxic nature that developed, and it wasn't necessarily a surprise, but some of the comments that you may have heard being directed at James Franklin. You were a few feet away from him walking into the tunnel after a game like this. We've seen moments where there's, interactions between Franklin and fans. It didn't happen this time around. Walked in there with his daughter. What kind of would you feel is worth passing along about the post-game observations that you saw, whether it's Franklin, Aller, this team generally, because Daniel and I are still tucked away in the press box at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I'm taking a phrase from Franklin that he's highly paid. The players are highly paid. These are pro athletes now, and it's a pro environment. I mean, you're in Beaver Stadium. There's Bud Light signs all over the place. There's advertising on the field. This isn't what it used to be. And I'm not saying that's wrong. The players deserve the money, and Franklin deserves what he's making. I'm not making an issue of that. But with that, when you turn into a pro team, you're going to have fans who react like they're at a pro game. And would I do that if I were a college fan? No, I would do it if I were at my beloved Eagles and they weren't playing well. I may drop a profanity or two while I'm watching a game on TV, even when teams are winning. But that comes with the territory. And to their credit, I think they understand that. I think they really do get that part of it. I mean, Drew Aller was actually proactive. He wasn't even asked about it, and I forget exactly how he phrased it. I put the quote up. I don't have it in front of me, but it's something like, "Yeah, I'll start off on this one," and it's like, he's my coach, and this is my team, and so I think they probably knew questions were coming, but I have no qualms with the fans booing. Again, not something that I would do, and I think the players are handling it the right way. One thing I would like to say is kids and relatives are off limits. Keep your mouth shut about them. I don't want to hear anything about daughters, about sons, about whoever, unless Jay Paterno was a coach, so he was fair game. But I think all of that, relatives, whatever, leave them out of it. Address your frustrations about the coaches and the players, and that's fine, but let's leave the families out of it.
Just to finish what I was going toward earlier, there's been some people in my mentions being like, "What's up with Franklin playing the victim?" And then I'm like, "What's up with you not comprehending everything that Franklin has said at every opportunity in front of the microphone since Saturday night?" He's talked about ownership, responsibility. I know people are like, "Well, what does that look like?" We'll find out. We don't know what he's discussing behind closed doors right now. I think he's looked pretty composed in front of us in a public setting. And look around. I mean, did anyone catch Brian Kelly after LSU lost a few weeks ago and how he treated the reporters who were asking very fair questions? I'm glad that we didn't get that kind of approach from James Franklin. I'm not surprised that we got it. But I think the people out there who are saying James Franklin is ducking away from a loss to Oregon, certainly no pun intended there, I don't see that. I haven't seen that in our couple interactions with him, and I don't think we're going to talk about Oregon game much with him moving forward this week, but that's kind of where it stands there.
One thing, Tyler, I think where it gets confused is that people may not like an answer from him, but he answers questions. So you can't force him to answer something in a certain way, and he's savvy enough that he's not going to answer it 99 times out of 100. He's not going to answer something the wrong way. So I don't know that you could say he's ducking stuff. He's answering questions the way he wants to answer. You may not agree with that. I mean, we've actually had that discussion in the media room in real time at one point with somebody I respect a lot. You may not agree with what he's saying, but he is answering questions, and he's not being confrontational. So whether you like that or not, that's the way he is.
Let's talk about the offense, because that was a centerpiece of the press conference on Monday. That's a lot of questions were directed, and the spotlight is certainly landing on that side of the football. We had some concerns through non-conference play. We really have some concerns after Penn State only manages 3 points through, I don't know, what was it, about 55, or felt like 50 minutes or so of this game. Daniel, inconsistency was the word that James Franklin brought up. He was initially asked, I think, about his offensive line. And he said, yeah, they've been pretty good at times, then they haven't been at times. And really it comes down to the entire offensive commentary right now. Inconsistent. It's what he brought up on a few occasions. And I think the issue here is you were expecting consistency when you have a second-year offensive coordinator, a third-year starting quarterback, a second-year quarterbacks coach, 5 offensive linemen with starting experience within your program, 2 running backs who are in their 4th year as a starter, and 3 transfer receivers who played a bunch of football, were team captains and starters for their last team, and were pretty highly lauded when they came to campus. And so when the end result through 1/3 of the regular season is the head coach saying, this is inconsistent, we may need to reevaluate how we're approaching things, this is highly concerning.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything we expected coming into this year hasn't really borne out. I think that now that we have the benefit of hindsight, is that the things where we weren't sure if they're red flags during the non-con, it was very like we can't definitively say that this is a problem right now. We have to see it. It's problems now. So moving forward, we talked about on the postgame pod, you have an interesting stretch coming up, with UCLA, Northwestern, and then to maybe fix some things, get right, and then a minor test at Iowa before that big test at Ohio State. But I think inconsistencies right now, I thought that was a good word for it, just because when you watch it, like, there is nothing that feels really consistent about this offense. With Aller, it's like on a throw-to-throw basis, where you think about the throw he had to Trevor Pena in the Villanova game, just that dart over the middle between 2 defenders, and then you turn around and you see him force that swing pass out to, or that screen pass out to Devontae Ross early in the game, where I don't watch much film, and I don't think I'm that good at film, but I identified that right away, that was probably not the way that you wanted to go with the ball. And it goes down from there in terms of what the running backs are doing, the running back usage, some of the personnel rotations, and then all the way down to the offensive line. It's like a snap to snap basis. I think that it took until that 4th quarter before you saw Penn State really put anything together where you felt like they were threatening, and you felt that they were really forcing the issue or dictating the terms of things. And it's been just really hard to watch. I mean, I think when you talk about something like inconsistency, I mean, that's not really like there's not really a clear cure for something like that. It's not like, okay, we'll switch the right tackle or whatever position, and that'll fix things. I mean, consistency is a little bit more intangible than that. So I'm not quite sure, moving forward, where that really starts. I think that that's probably a practice thing. That's probably something that you need to realize, that this is the way that your team is playing. And I think at this point, you have to expect that they're going to play like this moving forward. So you have to be in a position to remedy that, whichever way you can, whether that's scheme, game planning, personnel, whatever you can tweak to combat that, or make it so it doesn't hurt you really bad when it pops up. That's what you got to do right now.
If only they had a bye week before Oregon to address all those things.
Oh, Franklin said that they were working on Oregon during the off season. Like, it was just the
1-0, right?
Yeah, to lay that kind of egg in that spot, it was just really unexpected, and I think probably colors a lot of things moving forward.
But isn't it starting to become expected for these duds from the offense? I mean, you got Yurcich fired right after the Michigan performance in 2023. Last year, you got a defense playing and scoring a touchdown and giving you every chance. Hey, grab the baton from us and go freaking tie this game up or beat Ohio State, would you? Did not happen. The Notre Dame game, I think you saw more offensive life due in large part to the ground game, but your pass attack certainly threw a dud on the field in South Florida, and you lost a narrow game against Notre Dame. And I think that's what's becoming concerning. And, through it all, it's been a couple coordinators. It's been the same quarterback, though, Mark. And Drew Aller is the guy that we said going into the game, whether it's going to be praise or whether it's going to be a lot of pissed off fans, he's going to be the number 2 target next to James Franklin for whatever that is coming out of the game against Oregon. And you look at the performance, and there wasn't really anything polarizing about it. You can't really say that a lot of it was up to snuff and where it needed to be. Obviously, the final moment was a bad interception, and that puts the game away. And we've seen interceptions end games for Penn State in these bigger moments under Drew Aller of late. But when you talk to James Franklin about the development for his senior quarterback, and it's a guy who's now got 33 starts logged under his belt in the Nittany Lions uniform, we're not talking about wearing kid gloves here and a prospect that's going to have this high ceiling. We're talking about a guy who's got 8 games left, and then we'll see in his Penn State career. And so, Mark, when James Franklin was asked about that, he said, they've seen growth in practice. And he said, obviously, all these things need to translate into the game. He said, again, inconsistency has been a key with Drew Aller. A little bit later, I followed up and presented James with a stat that we discussed on the postgame podcast. And again, when you're talking about a quarterback who's played this much football, he's this deep into his career, he's got the offensive coordinator he's been working with since winter of 2023. And then you've got the quarterback's coach who's been on campus with him going back, before Drew was even a starter. And yet what we've got so far is an 8-game sample size going back to the last Big Ten championship game. 7 times he is under 60% completion. He was at 56% against Oregon. And then you marry that with what we witnessed from the junior version of Drew Aller in his first year working with this coordinator. He was 60% in every single regular season game. He was at 65% or better in 11 of those games. And that's a big dip to kind of reconcile. I asked James Franklin, how do you explain that at this stage? And he says, first off, it's not sustainable if they want to get to where they want to be as a program. I think that's obvious, but clearly there needs to be some kind of course correction with what they're doing in the pass game, what the trigger man number 15 is doing when he's looking downfield or pre-snap, post-snap. And ultimately, Mark, this is just not a conversation I think any of us thought we'd be closing out September with, is like, can Drew Aller find his way? Can Andy Kotelnicki find his way with this pass attack? Because wasn't this supposed to be one of the built-in pillars of a national championship contender?
Yeah, he's trying to do too much in these games. I mean, these late mistakes that's what that is. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, you have the stats. It's like, this just doesn't happen. He's trying to force things. And that's where I go back to what I said earlier. He just needs to take what the defense is giving him and not try to put everything on his own shoulders. The other thing is, and I asked James about Drew being emotional after games, but during games, it's one thing to show fire. It's another thing when you look like you're panicking out there because the team's not lining up right, or your center isn't doing the right thing, or whatever. I mean, he's losing his composure, and that can't happen. I mean, that could happen early in your career, but not for a guy who was 1 game away from playing for a national title last year. He's got to be cool and collected out there. I think he's just trying to force too much, and he's trying to do way too much. And I don't know that. How do you fix it? You can't threaten him with less playing time, right? I mean, you can't do that, because I don't know that you have an option behind him that's going to be better. And that's
isn't this Andy Kotelnicki's responsibility? I mean, everything we've heard about Kotelnicki since he came in was, this is a guy who's going to look at his current personnel, look at the strengths, look at the weaknesses, and tailor a plan that's going to put the team in a place to succeed. Thus far, it's been a little bit like walking up to the same wall, hitting your head against it, and wondering, ow, why does that hurt? And I think the people who are watching film in different ways than we're really capable of, some former players, some people I've been able to chat to, they think Kotelnicki's game plan right now is a real issue, and it's not helping Drew Aller. And James Franklin didn't go out and say that, but he said they've got to find easier throws for Drew Aller. And whose job is it to find easier throws? Andy Kotelnicki.
He also said they're better when he's running the ball. In what universe is Penn State
Did not
better?
get that. Yeah.
Right. And they were, I mean, at the end of the game, but he was taking brutal shots. I mean, so that's my point. It's almost as if you go back to when Kotelnicki was at Kansas, and I've had other people tell me this, that he was at his best when he had mobile quarterbacks. And it's almost like they're trying to force this stuff on Drew Aller. I mean, they're out there running Wildcat. Again, it worked late in the game, but, second snap of the game, Oregon's like, they had to be like, I can't even believe Penn State's making it this easy for us. Like, what is Drew Aller going to do out there when Katron Allen is taking the snap? Like, what is he going to do? And that's not being critical of him.
Yeah.
He's just not, he's not that weapon.
Mark, you're an Eagles fan. You remember how great the Eagles offense looked like when Mike Vick was orchestrating it and Chip Kelly was coaching it up? Remember how pathetic it looked when it was Sam Bradford trying to replicate what Mike Vick was good at?
Yes, and that's kind of my point. So, yeah, I go back. I think Kotelnicki deserves criticism without question. And, I would also say, I was joking before about the bye week, but we saw all of those things. And to your point, we can't break down film the way these coaches do. And we don't have access to every single practice. They do. They have to know what the issues are and how none of these things were addressed during the bye. Yeah, I understand that Oregon is a much better defense and a much better opponent. But where was one area where they looked like they used that bye week to improve offensively? Was there anything whatsoever? I mean, Drew Aller's best pass in the first half was when he got knocked on his rear end, and that again goes to overthinking everything. He's getting, he gets blitzed and gets knocked on his rear end and throws an unbelievable pass that's complete. He's back there when he has time and he's missing guys, or he's throwing it behind Luke Reynolds, or it's just not there. I think they have to use these next couple of weeks where, UCLA is in a disaster situation. Northwestern, even though Daniel thinks Northwestern's going to upset Penn State, that's his upset alert team. They've really struggled this year, although they actually ran the ball better against Oregon than Penn State did. You have to use these next 2 weeks to get this stuff settled because, yeah, you may say Iowa's a test, but that could be more than a test out there. I mean, that could be a very difficult place to play. They put on their big boy pants at least once a year out there and give somebody fits. And then obviously if you have that offense going into Ohio State, man, it's going to be seeing as well as how well Ohio State's playing defensively, it's going to be tough.
Finishing on the topic of Aller very quickly, around 5 a.m. on Sunday morning, I attempted to do some math on the verge of delirium, which is a dangerous thing, but I triple checked the math, and it picked up on a conversation that Daniel and I had on the postgame podcast a couple hours earlier about how we're in a spot where I think you can realistically have a debate. Would you rather have 2022 Sean Clifford, who people were calling to be benched for the freshman version of Drew Aller? Would you be in a better spot with that Sean Clifford playing quarterback here or this version of Drew Aller? It's not a conversation I think anybody thought we would be in. I think the anticipation was the number one quarterback recruit, the 5-star, was going to take that ball from Sean Clifford and take this whole thing to the next level. And he was really going to be able to on a large scale platform, elevate this offense, elevate the pass attack. I decided to do a little comparative analysis. Sean Clifford in his career against top 10 opponents at home or on a neutral field, he had 4 games like that. He completed 63% of his passes on average, 284-yard average through the air for passing yards, 9 total touchdown throws, 4 interceptions. Drew Aller has 6 career games against a top 10 opponent, either in Beaver Stadium or on a neutral field, 53% completion along the way, 148-yard average, which is really a tough pill to swallow when you look at those matchups and what may have happened if there was a better passing game in those situations. 9 touchdown throws, 5 interceptions. So I think right now it's just a difficult reality. And if we're looking at maybe evolving the offense a bit, do you have to rely on the ground game as the focal point for you to get you through, maybe get you right? And that's hard to do right now, Daniel, because one half of that tandem that we know has been really special for them has just not looked like the player we thought he might. Much like a fellow former 5-star, another face of this program in Drew Aller, Nick Singleton has kind of stutter-stepped his way through the first third of this season. He was at 11 carries, 21 yards against Oregon. He got the bulk of touches on the ground until Katron Allen started to take it late in the game very effectively. And we're now to the point where, again, you're through 1/3 of the season. The sample size has, about 50 carries for these guys each. And Katron Allen is over 7 yards per carry, and Nick Singleton is under 4 yards per carry. James Franklin said today they want Katron Allen to be able to build on his success. He acknowledged the early success. He said Nick Singleton, he feels, isn't really that far off from what he's done in the past. He said the difference is he's not getting those 2 or 3 runs a game where he finds the daylight and races off. Part of that seems to suggest the offensive line isn't providing that daylight, but let's be honest, we've seen Katron Allen be able to carve out some really impressive moments on the ground. We had not seen that from Nick Singleton. And so now that we enter this phase where Penn State's got to figure things out over the next month, if they want to get over the hurdle that is Ohio State, what do you think is the approach? What do you think is the big question for this running back plan, Daniel?
I think the big question for this running back plan is, can you lean on Katron Allen? Can you come out and try to establish things with him and go from there? I know that Penn State has done a really nice job of making this a timeshare over the past couple of years and keeping both of these guys happy as far as we can tell, utilizing them well across different games and different scenarios. But I think at this point, you have to really evaluate who gives us the best chance to win. How do we use him to give us the best chance to win? Just evaluating that, kind of like what we've gone back to, things that you would have thought would have been examined during the bye week in terms of game planning for your biggest game of the year to date. But we'll see. I mean, with Singleton, it is the thing where, he breaks off 2 of these 70 yards, that yards per carry average jumps, 2 or 3 yards, the picture changes a little bit. And I know that
Daniel, don't we all acknowledge that? And we said it before this game. He's a guy who he hits one. I mean, Saquon Barkley had games like that with much lesser offensive lines. But I'm thinking now that we're through 50 carries and his longest run is 16. You're now kind of wish casting that Nick Singleton's going to do it in 2025 because we haven't yet seen it. And it's that kind of this thing where it's a tantalizing possibility, but you're taking the ball out of someone who is clearly definitively playing strong football right now in Katron Allen. You're not wish casting anything about this guy. You have it in real time. You're seeing it, what he can do for the offense in real time. And I think that's the slippery slope here with Nick Singleton. It's hard to say because this guy's going to end up being the all-time leader in Penn State total yards and rushing touchdowns and all that stuff. But right here, right now, it's a difficult debate to make, I think, for Nick Singleton.
Yeah, I mean, it's, what have you done for me lately versus what can you do for me? And I think right now you have to lean on what have you done so far. I mean, this year it's been getting used to that new angle of watching the game in the press box. So when I go back to the TV copy and watch, the picture does look a little different, but it feels like that we've seen these plays from Singleton where, from our vantage point, it looks like he's getting outside. It looks like a hole there. It looks like there's space. It looks like there's these opportunities for him to get downfield. He gets tackled, and then you look up at the TV or you look at the live stats. It's a 2-yard gain. There just hasn't really been that explosive ability from him. And I think at this point, you're not even really asking for, like you said, Tyler, like these 60, 70-yard runs. I mean, you're asking for a couple 20-yard runs. You're asking for consistently picking up 5 to 7 yards on a consistent basis. And to me, that was always a pretty good Singleton calling card where, he was one of these backs where, like, I know that we classified Allen more as the Thunder in their duo, but Singleton, we know that he likes contact. We know he can finish through it. And he felt like a guy that he can turn those 3-yard runs into 5 or 6 yard runs regularly. And that's just not really happening right now. I think it's all these things are connected. And so, not having that running game, I think that puts Aller in a tough spot. Aller not being able to really generate anything explosive. I think that puts the running game in a bad spot. I think the offensive line's play puts both of those aspects in a bad spot. But I think that if you're Penn State, you've got a 4-game sample size now. You played, maybe your second toughest game of the year. You have hard data to go off of which guys you can lean on, who's producing for you. And I think now you have to lean into that. Since we're almost a month away, from that Ohio State game now.
And I'm not even sure it's a Nick Singleton, Katron Allen conversation. It's a conversation that starts to me with Katron Allen has been quite clearly your most productive and efficient offensive player over the last 8 or 9 games that you have played. yet he's not been able to be a featured guy in this big moment. He had 4 touches. I know they didn't have a lot of touches for anybody, but if you're looking to help yourself on down and distance, he seems to be the kind of guy you might want to turn to early in these series, early in these games. He's been the tone setter for the offense, and yet just really a supplemental piece for what they've done so far offensively. Mark, you want to chime in anything on whether it's the running game, the offensive line? Are we talking more about Frank Leonard at this point? I mean, where are you with everything?
Well, I always want to talk about Frank Leonard, but no. The other thing I would add is that when we've seen Ross and Pena with the ball, both of those guys look like they have more wiggle, and both of them look more likely to break a long run, even though it hasn't necessarily happened. Nobody's housed one yet. They haven't had a number of opportunities. So,
great point.
Also, when you're looking at Singleton and comparing him to the freshman back from Oregon, whose name is escaping me at this point, that kid just looked electric, didn't he?
Pierre Hill.
Yeah, Katron has never looked like that, and that's not a knock on Katron. That's not who he is. I mean, he's, tough, physical. That kid from Oregon was like, talk about wiggle, talk about quickness. He looked like at a different level than all the other running backs in the stadium. And I think you get a little bit of that from Ross and from Pena. How much could you rely on that to spark your running game? I don't know, but I just think at this point, when you're looking at options, I mean, Aller has a longest run of the year than Singleton. Who would have ever guessed that in a million years?
Nick Singleton last year, 5 games where he went 40 plus at least once in those games. Through 4 games, he has not gone 10 yards on a run in half of them, and his longest is 16. So we'll see what happens as they sort through. Again, not the kind of conversations we thought we'd be having. This team still has all of its goals attainable to them, but they clearly have some adjustments to make down the road. And as they look to make those adjustments, James Franklin brought it up to us pretty early on in this press conference that the team that won the most recent national championship, the Ohio State Buckeyes, suffered 2 painful defeats during the 2024 regular season. One was on the road, a tight matchup against that Oregon squad. The other, of course, was a super embarrassing, super deflating. People thought Ryan Day was going to lose his job over it, a loss to Michigan. And that was a pretty average Michigan team they lost to. Of course, now we got the reality that this is not Ohio State we're talking about. It's the Penn State Nittany Lions, led by James Franklin. And they've got defensive coordinator Jim Knowles to chime in on this because he experienced it behind closed doors with the Buckeyes along the way. Franklin said he has already talked to the defense about that experience of overcoming some setbacks in the regular season. He hopes to kind of bring him in front of the entire team this week. But Daniel, clearly this is something that Franklin, as he's pivoting away from the heartbreak, is saying, look what just happened. Why can't we do that? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's Franklin taking advantage of the resources that are around him that he has on the staff. I mean, he said today that he talked to Knowles about this before the season, that this is something that he had in mind. And yeah, I mean, I think that that's just being prepared. He said that he talked to Knowles, I guess yesterday. Knowles talked to the defense yesterday, and Franklin wants Knowles to eventually talk to the whole team about it. And kind of like what I was talking about earlier, it's just an example of this new college football landscape where 1 win, like you're not done, or 1 loss, you're not done. 2 losses, you're still not done. It's just a different game right now. So like you said, I mean, this is, I think, at Penn State and Ohio State, 2 different programs, different coaches, different recent track records of success, different histories, a lot of different circumstances there. But I think that the lessons can be really applicable. I think that ever since that 2021 season, we've seen Franklin do an excellent job of keeping these teams from not letting that 1 loss turn into 2. We were talking about when everyone was calling for Drew Aller to take over for Sean Clifford back in 2022, it was like, they've lost 2 games. Like, let's just turn it over to the young guy and go. But you saw how that 2022 team just really ran through November, with no one put up resistance against that team. And I think that shows the job that Franklin really does managing the locker room, and all of that. You do wonder, like, there is a psychological aspect to it because you talk about, like, that was 2022. We're in 2025 now. And you're asking this team, which has done a good job of this over these past couple of years, to do it yet again. And young guys, Penn State has a lot of them. the nice thing about young players, a lot of them don't know any better when it comes to certain situations, so they can just go. But older players, you're asking them to do this again. I think they can, but there is just an added element there, an added layer to how things are going, and it just happens. This situation just keeps happening for Penn State. But Knowles is there. I think that he's someone that it's clear that Franklin really respects what he has to say. It's clear that the defense does. I think it's clear that he has the respect of the whole roster right now. So I think that he's someone who, when he talks, people listen. And if you're Franklin, it's an obvious resource to lean on right now.
And a key contrast to that strong finish in 2022 was that everyone was okay with going to the Rose Bowl and not making the playoffs. I shouldn't say okay, but it was still considered a good finish to the season. This time around, the expectations are set so high internally and externally that people were thinking bye week or bust almost. Like if you don't have a bye in the playoff, that's a disappointment. When it comes to this team, Mark, I think what you do wonder is now that they have spent the last 8-9 months getting a lot of praise piled up, seeing the national media come around. A lot of people who had never picked Penn State to win the Big Ten title picked them to win the Big Ten title. You have teams putting Penn State in the national championship game looking ahead and really buying in and firmly putting 2 feet on the bandwagon. Hell, I picked them to finish 12-0 this year. And so when you look at what happens next for this team psychologically, we're going to learn a lot about them. They're going to learn a lot about themselves. We heard from guys like Nick Dawkins and Nittany Sutton and Zaki Wheatley after the game, and they hauled all the right mindset. I'm going to have a piece up on this on Tuesday morning, but James Franklin said they can't allow this to become where they're weighted down by negativity. They've got to find a way to get past it. What do you make of what we get to learn about Penn State well before the Ohio State matchup, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, Daniel hit on it that James has done a good job of not letting one team beat them twice. I mean, getting that message across to the players is just huge. And as you mentioned, Tyler, hearing the right things from everybody after the game, I think is the first right step. But to me, I think once these couple days are out of the way, they just have to tune all of it out and get focused. I know it's cliche, but that's how you go about doing that. Everything is still there. I mean, I do find it odd that Knowles only talked to the defense because I think the offense probably needed to hear what he had to say more than the defense did. So you do need to get him, there, I think, in front of the offense, but they have to tune it out and just focus on what lies ahead. And as I mentioned earlier, you have a couple games here where if you do what you need to do, you should be able to work through some of the issues. But now you're looking at a situation where if you don't get these things settled, it could get ugly out at Ohio State, Yeah. So, and then you're looking at if you lose to Ohio State, I know I'm projecting here, but hey, if it's a tough loss, that could knock you out of everything. If it's real close, maybe you're still alive, but there's so much on that Ohio State game now that I think they have to kind of build up to it and just be ready for it when it gets there.
And I hate to heap more on the starting quarterback's shoulders, but he knows what he signed up for a few years ago. I think he understands it far more now that with the NIL world and his exposure to the spotlight. I think he knows what's on his shoulders, but he needs to be the guy who sets the tone. All due respect to Nick Dawkins and Zaki Wheatley and the quarterback needs to be the one this week, starting now or starting Tuesday practice, who's got to whip everyone out of this funk. And he can't be riding on this funk for the next few games and hope it gets sorted out at Kinnick Stadium in Iowa City. That can't be where you try to find it. It's got to get worked out here in the next 2 matchups. Guys, really appreciate the perspective here from you both. We got a lot more to talk about Penn State this week. We'll focus in on UCLA with a Bruins beat reporter later. We'll get a lot of recruiting feedback on what the whiteout meant for Penn State from Tyler Calvaruso as well. And these guys will get back with me later on in the week after we get a look at practice, and we'll give you our preview and predictions for Game 5 of this Penn State season. For Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for tuning in to the Lions 24/7 podcast.